You're listening to Breaking BizDev with John Tyerman and Mark Wainwright. Conversations that break down, beat up, and redefine business development for the professional services firms of tomorrow. And now for your hosts, John and Mark.
Welcome, business developers, to another episode of Breaking BizDev. Actually, this is a special edition of Breaking BizDev.
Ooh, special. I like it.
Yeah, we are going to go behind the scenes. It's been a year since we launched. And
unbelievable.
I know, it's crazy. I think we've got over like 30 plus episodes published over the first year. And, I thought it would be worth going behind the scenes, sharing with our listeners some of the ins and outs, how this show came to be, thank a bunch of our kind of super listeners, and then explore some potential possibilities for what could come in the next year.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a great agenda for the conversation, John. I think, it's you never know how these things kind of evolve. I think people are always kind of curious about how things get started, and I mean, I'm curious about how all these other podcasts get started. In a recent episode, we've mentioned other podcasts and how long they've run, and this would be fun to kind of pull back the curtain a little bit and talk about how it all started, how it's going, and what's next.
But first, if you're listening to this, make sure that you subscribe on Apple Podcasts. Make sure you subscribe on Spotify. Follow. We have a YouTube page. Go check that out.
Yeah, YouTube. We're everywhere. We're everywhere.
Well, it didn't start off that way.
It's true.
We just kind of grew and evolved into that, and we'll get to that.
Yeah, good.
Let's start here, Mark. Let's start with kind of like the origin story. Why did we launch this podcast? How did this show come to be?
My backstory extends just a little bit further back from the moment that you and I connected. When I first started this practice in a sort of 2020, that's this big milestone everybody has in their head, is like 2020 was the pandemic and COVID and all that stuff. So some years before that, I was bold enough to set out on my own and wasn't exactly clear about, where that path was going to lead me. But soon into that, I uncovered and started building this fractional sales management practice. And I had been doing that for some years and started uncovering these experts on Apple Podcasts or wherever else. And one of the first ones that I came across were Jeff McKay and Jason Malicki on Rattle and Pedal, right? And they had been at it for a little, some years or whatever the timing was, and great content. So I started listening. I listened to that podcast and others. And then I was so bold as to send them each a note and say, hey, I think I've got something fun to talk about. Let's talk about it. So in early 2020, and the reason I bring this one up was because it was literally recorded, I believe, and I had this stuck in my head, March 8th, 2020. So we recorded it right then. And, we had a fantastic conversation. We talked about sales pipeline, backlog, and what I like, what actually Jason Malicki called the pipeline cliff, which all of us kind of think in our heads, oh yeah, I see the visual, right?
Yeah.
Right. My future work is headed off the cliff, right? Little did we know a week later, the entire world would shut down and that pipeline cliff would be a very real thing for a lot of people. Now, obviously, things were a little different. My work benefited coming out of the pandemic as others did. But that was that was my very first guest podcast appearance. And after that, in the following years, I probably appeared on about a dozen podcasts as a guest. People were kind enough and gracious enough to kind of invite me to be a guest. We talked about various topics, and that sort of sparked the interest and the fire in me that grew over time. And I thought, wow, wouldn't it be cool if I could create my own podcast? But I'll tell you what, John, I had absolutely no idea how to get started.
Mark, have you considered creating a Spotify playlist of all your guest appearances?
Yeah,
you should totally do that.
I've got them kind of set aside. There's this, you can kind of save them in sort of your podcast tools, whatever interface you use. You can kind of set them aside. So I have a number of them saved, And there's a lot of people out there who, they'll just say, I cannot stand to listen to myself talk on a podcast or something. I actually don't mind it, because I can listen to what was said and edit and improve, and maybe reframe sometimes some of the things that are discussed. But yeah, I don't have any problem. And occasionally I will go back to that library and not just listen to it, but I'll also use it. Very similar to what I do with this podcast. I will use those guest appearances in very specific situations with clients that I work with, and say, hey, look, if you want to learn more about this particular topic, I've got a podcast. It's either ours or a guest podcast that I appeared on. Go listen to it. If that's your preferred way of kind of ingesting information, then have a listen. So John, what's your backstory? What led up to the moment that we connected? And yours is, you have a richer history than I do in regards to podcasting.
In regards to podcasting,
Yeah.
sure. I'm still a little green around the gills when it comes to being a solo business owner.
Yeah.
I launched my solo business, Red Cedar Marketing, in October of 22, and I lucked into a client, and so that was great. And then a few months later, I think it was March of 23, I posted on LinkedIn like, hi, let me reintroduce myself. I'm on this journey. I was laid off, and now I'm a solo fractional marketing consultant. And the post just blew up, right? It got like 60,000 impressions. There's hundreds of comments, and I was just like, whoa, that's really cool. I got a couple clients out of it, which was great.
Yeah.
But I think that might have been the post that caught your eye, Mark, because soon thereafter you sent me a connection request and said, hey, John, we're on similar paths. Let's connect. And then a few months go by, and I realized that, I really need to focus my positioning. A fractional marketing consultant, that's just so like broad.
Right.
And so I knew that I needed to really niche down. And so I started focusing on podcast marketing for experts and professional services firms.
Right.
And, once I started narrowing that position and started really talking about podcasts, that's when I think you and I had kind of like a back and forth on LinkedIn, like, hey, what would happen if we started a podcast together or something like that?
Yeah, you posted something and I called your bluff on it. You said some question like, yeah, wouldn't it be cool to start a podcast? And I said, I'm in, let's go. And I think both of us probably, sort of like, figuratively looked at each other and was like, are you serious? Yeah. So I think it was one of those.
Yeah. And then we had a conversation, and then I think it just kind of naturally fit. I think we've got some good chemistry. You've been on many podcasts as a guest. I've hosted a few podcasts in the past, and I think it really made sense. And part of why it made sense for me was, if I'm going to be helping experts and firms launch podcasts and use that as part of their marketing strategy, then I really need to walk the walk. I can't just talk the talk.
Right.
And so that's part of what I wanted to do is do that. And we both serve professional services firms with different service offerings, so it made sense.
You mentioned it there, John, just a little bit ago, that you have hosted podcasts in the past, and I don't want to gloss over that. You have hosted at least 2, maybe 3 podcasts over the last, 10 years or so, right?
The first one was in 19, and that was The Visible Expert. And I co-hosted that with Kelly Waffle. That was my first foray into podcasting.
Yeah.
And then I hosted the Digital Marketing Troupe from 21 to 22. And I interviewed, it was more of a technical side of marketing. So I interviewed like SEO technical experts and paid media experts, analytics experts.
Right.
And then we launched this show, and I also host another show called Podcasting and Professional Services, where I interview business podcasters like Jason and Jeff and Blair and David C. Baker from Two Bobs. And that's been great. And it's been really helping me kind of understand the world of podcasting and, how different podcasters approach their shows and how there's really no rules in podcasting.
Right.
And we're still in the early end of things. And I just think it's great to, get on the board with you and kind of ride this wave.
Yeah, it's been fantastic, and your experience and expertise with all of this has made breaking BizDev and my work 1,000 times easier. Like I said, I would never have jumped into the deep end and tried to start my own podcast without someone who knew their way around. And you, yeah, we just got connected, and it happened. So it's great, and it's been a fantastic year.
Agreed. And I would highly recommend, if anyone's listening to this, if they're thinking about launching a show, doing it with a co-host is so much fun.
Yeah.
So if you're ever thinking about that, having someone to kind of go through that journey with is really fun. Excellent. So that's how we got started. Mark, what I'd love to do is, in part of like reflecting on this past year, first and foremost, I just want to give a few shout outs and thank yous to some of what's kind of shaping up to be our Mount Rushmore of listeners.
Yeah, and I'm sure some of these folks who are probably listening to this will chuckle a little bit, but it's a little bit goes a long way when you are starting something new and building an audience and sort of establishing your sort of recognized authority out there in the marketplace. And everybody who listens, who subscribes, is part of this. But yeah, there's a handful of people who have offered reviews, who have been regular supporters, typically on LinkedIn, but maybe other channels as well. But yeah, there's a good group of folks that I'm happy to call, and you are likely happy to call, not just professional connections, but good friends.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's give them some shout outs. So, there's some folks who have left a review for the show, and that just means so much. When I go and I see an unsolicited review for Breaking BizDev, it just warms my heart and just makes my day. So, Bryce Merriman, Hannah Smolinski, Tyler Wiggins, thank you all so much for leaving those reviews and for listening to the show.
Yeah, and everybody out there's thinking, boy, if I'd have just left a review on Breaking BizDev, then I would have gotten a shout out as well. And I'm thinking, yeah, go ahead,
do it.
Yeah, do it. Yeah, fun.
And like you mentioned earlier, Mark, I mean, there's other ways that folks have been supporting the show and engaging with us. And we created a LinkedIn company showcase page where we publish like these short little clips from the show. And folks like that. They like those little videos. They're able to hear kind of a little snippet. And if an episode piques their interest, then they can click through and listen to the whole thing.
Right.
But there's a handful of folks that, I see pop up regularly on that LinkedIn page. Patrick Johnston, Zach Bowden, Lucas Gray, Kevin Thompson, Ben Klein, Rochelle Ray. These folks have just been engaged over the past year, and I just want to say thank you so much for everything that you've done to help with the show.
Absolutely. And one of the common threads, and this isn't universal, but one of the common threads with a lot of these people is that they are solopreneurs, or they have their own firms, or they have a small firm, and they realize the importance of supporting others, creating a strong network, and just these little moves of support and attention that people pay to us and to our podcasts are so valuable. So absolutely, that crowd and more, many thanks. You're listening to Breaking BizDev,
the podcast that beats up, breaks down, and redefines business development for the professional services firms of tomorrow. Your hosts are John Tyerman, founder of Red Cedar Marketing, the podcast marketing company for experts and professional services firms,
and Mark Wainwright, principal consultant and founder of Wainwright Insight, the fractional sales manager and sales consultant to professional services firms.
If you find this podcast helpful, please help us by following the show and leaving a review on Apple Podcasts.
And now, back to the show.
What I'd like to do next, Mark, is I'd like to just kind of touch on some of our more popular episodes, and maybe we can opine as to why they were popular. And why folks really gravitated towards those. And so, I've got 3 episodes. We'll start with number 3 and we'll work our way up to number 1. So We'll start with number 3. And this was, what's broken in business development today? And if folks that are listening and have listened to this show, you'll know that you'll probably recall that episode featured, I think, 4 or 5 different guest clips
Right.
where we kind of weaved them into the episode.
That was a good one. That was our first foray into bringing other voices into Breaking BizDev. You and I are both solicited regularly and in an increasing fashion for guest appearances. And we didn't want to say no. So we wanted to take a slightly different tack on how we bring other voices to this podcast.
Yeah.
And I think this episode was successful. It was the first time we had done it. We brought, like you said, a handful of individuals and experts into the podcast, and we posed the question from your perspective, what's broken in business development? And they gave us a wide spectrum of responses that we had on the podcast. And, John, you know all the details of this. Anytime we can bring other people, other personalities, other thought leaders into our podcast, it grows the audience, right? Because their followers, their connections are maybe exposed to Breaking BizDev for the first time. So I think that's probably one of the big reasons why this was so successful.
I agree. Totally agree. I think you hit the nail on the head with that one. All right, so let's go to the second most popular episode in the last year. And this was prospecting for doer sellers, targets, tools, and techniques.
This was surprising that this is second ranked, and I think here's what I'm picturing. I'm picturing that someone came across, someone who's a doer seller in an engineering firm or consulting firm or architect or whatever else, and they slipped their little Apple earbuds in and went for a walk and played this, and they didn't let anyone else know they were listening because you can't use the word prospecting in most professional services firms. That's only for like sleazy full-time salespeople, right? That's spamming, people through email and through social media and stuff. But it's really important to understand what prospecting is and how proactive outreach can really help you create the firm that you really want to be. And hopefully it was useful, and it was designed to be kind of a practical step-by-step approach to, how do I do outreach in an organized fashion? Who are my targets? What different tools or channels should I be using? And how do I bring that all together into a process that is effective, easy for me, and hopefully get some good results?
Yeah, I think it's indicative of where folks are this year in terms of, hey, we need to try new things to win new business.
Right.
The old plays aren't working, and so being more proactive, I think that just the notion of that is appealing to many doer sellers, and I think that's part of why this episode was successful, is because we positioned it for those doer sellers, and we tailored it, and we made it actionable tool, targets, tools, and techniques.
Right.
We laid it out for them. All right. The most popular episode in the last year. This is number 1 on the list and number 1 in our hearts. Checking in, ghosting, and the magic email.
This makes me chuckle because it's
everyone's looking
part
for
of
a
the
silver bullet.
Yeah, there's a little right. There's a little clickbait in this one, which was
maybe
so funny. Yeah, this is good, but I think just if we scratch below the surface on this is a common issue, and it's what happens when my communication with a prospective client just vaporizes. Like
stalls.
What do I do? And I have clients. I'm probably going to talk to 1 or 2 later on today that are suffering from this today, right? So it's a common challenge throughout the industry, and it's worth a listen. I want people to go back and kind of listen to it. The magic email is I didn't create it. It's one of those things that attribution has been lost because it's been used by so many different people in so many different ways. I think I first came across the concept of it on the Two Bobs podcast, but Blair pulled it from somebody else who pulled it from somebody else, whatever else. But the magic email is just a really powerful, simple tool that you can use to, I would say, the most effective part of the magic email is to separate yourself emotionally from new business, right? From opportunities that have stalled, that are not moving, where you're just saying, look, if we're done, we're done, and I'm ready to walk away. And we invoke that wonderful sort of cognitive bias called loss aversion. And people say, wait, we're not done yet. So that's a fun one. Go listen to it. I'm happy that people listen to it and appreciate it. It is an ongoing issue. And even though I call it the magic email, it's really not a silver bullet. It's not the single answer to it. The single answer to all of this checking in, ghosting, and the magic email stuff happens way further upstream, right? It happens from your very first conversation to establish a really good, mutually respectful relationship with your prospects that says, we need to communicate. We need to do so in a human, rational, reasonable fashion. We need to respect each other. And if anybody's ghosting anybody else, then it's clearly a sign that this isn't going to work. So, yeah.
So if you're suffering from feeling ghosted, go check out Checking In, Ghosting, and the Magic Email.
Yeah.
All right. So those were our 3 most popular episodes of the last year, and it'll be interesting if we do the same exercise a year from now. What episodes will pop then. What I'd like to do is just a recap on some of the experiments that we ran, and I'd love to get your hot takes on them, Mark. So I'm gonna run through. I've got 4 listed here, and let's do this. Why don't you rank them in terms of the most successful in terms of experiments?
Oh,
So let's here. I'll run through them,
Yeah.
and then you can rank them.
Yeah.
Does that
sure.
sound good?
Yeah, sure.
This will be fun. All right. So experiment number 1, setting up a YouTube channel.
Yeah.
Experiment number 2, getting merch for the show. We've got hats. We've got gym bags. We've got shirts.
Love it.
You know, I might just even put links to the merch into the description here. Another experiment was using guest clips in an episode. That was What's Broken in Business Development Today. And then the 4th experiment that we ran was, we're all constantly experimenting with different episode formats and typologies, we like to say.
Right.
So how would you rank those 4 in terms of their the most impact?
Obviously, because it ranked pretty high, and we brought in other voices, I think the guest clips were really. I think that sort of typology for an episode is really successful. It is something that we will continue to focus on. It's nice to have somebody else in your ear other than just John and I, and the additional perspectives are really, really useful. So maybe that's at the top. I would say right next to that, and the metrics that we have discussed around this podcast will prove out that the YouTube channel is effective. And this completely flies in the face of, on day 1, when you said, oh yeah, we're going to be recording video for this podcast. I thought, oh boy, here we go. Right. We want video as well as the audio. I was hoping that we would just be able to, have ourselves sequestered in our dark little rooms and, be speaking into microphones. But no, we've got video, and lo and behold, the video has given us so many different assets to use: the short little clips, the long form video, just a variety of stuff. Plus, it's a whole new channel, right? And you've shown me that having those audio only clips on YouTube aren't super effective. No. People really want something to watch, so yeah, I would put that second. The different episode formats is great, and it's nice that we've been able to define different typologies and kind of mix them up, where we highlight a problem, or we beat something up, or we have an episode. I think we call it sort of yin yang, where we will come at a topic in a very sort of balanced way. So we're kind of both sort of bringing our perspectives to it, and it's kind of a 50-50 back and forth. episode format, and then we have interviews where a lot of times it's me interviewing you, or more often you interviewing me, however that played out. And then I would say on the list of 4 things, number 10 would be the merch, John.
Maybe that'll creep its way up the list the more years we do this show.
It'll move up. But yeah, I have to say, when I got that package from you a couple months ago with the black t-shirt with our Breaking BizDev logo across the front of it, I was shocked. I was excited. I loved it. I've actually worn it. I don't know if I've actually worn it kind of boldly out into public yet, but I'm certain I will. You said you got a t-shirt, and then immediately after you got it, you went and played a gig somewhere, because you're a musician as well, right?
I ripped the sleeves off of it. And I'm a drummer, and Breaking BizDev, it kind of fit with like the ripped sleeve type thing.
I love it.
I also have a trucker hat with the Breaking BizDev.
Yeah, that's good. I think the merch is fun. And I'll tell you, from that whole thing, my takeaway from the merch and the logo and the branding and everything else is that I'm kind of proud and excited of the brand that has been created, that is Breaking BizDev. It seems to resonate with folks. It makes sense, and I think brands are most effective when it all just makes sense. People can kind of listen to the content and see the brand and kind of understand it, and it looks like a really well done, sort of comprehensive, well thought through package. So, and that, I'm gonna give you full attribution on all of that you've just had this foresight to think this could, we need to start right, and we need to build this thing. Yeah, way to go. Congratulations on all of that. Your vision for this brand has grown far beyond what I thought it would.
Well, and also shouts to my friend Brian Lemon, who helped us out with the logo design.
Yeah,
he did a smash up job, and pun intended, because
and we went through a couple versions, and I said, no, John, we actually have to break it.
Yeah,
like there needs to be something that's broken, and you're like, oh, I think I get it now. Okay,
yeah. And I think it looks great.
Yeah.
So let's for our final kind of segment on this episode, Mark, what I'd love to do is just kind of like explore the possibilities, like what's possible in the next year. Like, what are some of the ideas that we've had that, maybe or maybe not, that we will work into the show, and what can our listeners expect?
This is funny. I recall this conversation where you came in and said, oh yeah, we can do these 10 other things this coming year. And I said, maybe one, maybe 2, we'll see. I was the voice of reason in that conversation, but some of the things you've mentioned are, an email community or a Slack community, just building an audience around Breaking BizDev and leveraging a different communication channel. Slack, as people may know, creates this sort of, synchronous / asynchronous place where people can go and share thoughts. And, you can kind of do that through an email newsletter as well. It's a little more one directional, but the concept of creating a community around Breaking BizDev is interesting. And, right. Asterisk on all this, John, is that there's no guarantees we'll spin any of these up in the coming year.
Not making any promises.
Right. Not making any promises, but it sounds interesting. And, heck, if anybody out there in the audience is like, oh my gosh, that is something I've been really looking for, let us know. Sure.
Totally. Another idea that we had was we talked about the merch. I don't think we need to talk about that anymore.
Yeah.
No, I think we have breakingbizdev.com. We have a very simple website there, but I think one of the things in the next year is what I would love to do is kind of create a website that's a little bit more robust than just a media player. Maybe there's different ways that we can engage with folks. A merch store being one, but perhaps, maybe we can organize certain episodes into, like a series or, written content, or even creating a custom GPT that folks can query and ask Breaking BizDev, right? And what would John and Mark recommend about this?
Yeah, right.
So those are some ideas.
Good.
Good.
Yeah, that URL, it's like you said, it's simple now. It could be something. It could be something more. You mentioned live podcast episodes, which sounds daunting.
Yeah. It's funny. I was just the other day, I was going back and forth on LinkedIn with Rochelle Ray, who we
Right.
mentioned earlier. She's a listener. She runs a podcast called Burnout Banter. And she was asking, my perspective on, some of the technical aspects of running a live podcast episode at a conference. Um, and so I thought that was really interesting. We could potentially meet up in person and do a live podcast conversation recording. We could do a live stream podcast episode virtually. So that would be kind of like another way to do that. And I think that would be fun. If anything, chalk that up as an experiment, an opportunity to learn and test things out.
Right. I don't, there are some podcasts out there that are very heavily produced and very heavily edited. Ours is less so, I would say. Not that there's a bunch of stuff in our podcast that couldn't be edited out, just to be clear. Like we could definitely, you could take a sharper knife to everything. But in general, I would say it's not heavily edited. And I think what most people think of when they think of a live podcast is just the gaffes and the mess ups and the flubs or whatever else. But I think that's part of what makes a live episode engaging, is that we've got people here that are just running live and they just press play and we're going to go. I think one of the things that gets in the way with live podcast episodes is just simply the technology, is that the hiccups are frequent. I would say a lot of times when I've engaged with some live events, the technology gets in the way. We use Riverside to record this, so we are engaging synchronously live, but at the exact same time we have both video content and audio content that is being recorded locally and then is uploaded separately. So the artifacts that are collected in this platform are pretty much error free, which is great.
Yeah, I think another benefit of a live podcast episode is just the fact that we could have folks ask us questions, and I
Yeah.
think that's kind of the biggest benefit in my mind, is being able to engage with folks in real time.
Yeah.
And so hopefully, as this show has grown over the past year, I think we're nearing the point where doing one of those live episodes might make sense, and so I'm excited at the prospect of that.
Good.
And a couple of other possibilities in the coming year. Sponsorships are always a possibility if the right one were to come along and they're aligned with our audience. If they're, either a service provider or maybe a technology platform that fits kind of our target audience and adds value to our audience. I think that's kind of the big thing. But, maybe not. Maybe we decide that it's not worth it. We don't want to sponsor.
Well, that's in my book, that's one of those things that is falls into the category of never say never.
Right. Yeah. Exactly.
Rewind a long time ago, that was not where we wanted to go, and a few of the podcasts that we consistently and regularly point to have either very little or no sort of interruptions or sponsor mentions or any of that stuff. And I appreciate that, but at the same time, you can see how you can come into a mutually beneficial situation with a sponsor. Helps you, helps them. So I mean, because there's very real costs involved in producing a podcast. So this is not a freebie, right? There's layers of costs involved in all of this, both for you and I. So it's not cheap. And from my perspective, I think we've had this conversation that if we brought in a sponsor, we would be simply looking to offset the modest costs that are involved in bringing Breaking BizDev to everybody out there.
Exactly. So that I think that's the list of we had a longer list and we narrowed it down to here's some viable paths that we can both see.
Sure.
If you're listening to this and if you have any feedback or ideas or if some of the, if something really resonated with you, reach out to Mark or I on LinkedIn. Then we'd love to hear your perspective. Thank you for listening, first of all. And we'd love to hear your ideas.
Absolutely. And on this last little bit here, John, I think it's important just to say to you, thank you for walking this path with me, and just having enough gumption at the very beginning of this to think, oh yeah, we can make this into something, and I think it's become something cool. So many thanks for that.
Yeah. Well, and thank you, Mark, for walking this journey with me too,
Yeah.
because I think this was like you said, it wouldn't, without the two of us, Breaking BizDev wouldn't happen. And so I'm really happy for what we've created, and I'm really proud of it too.
Good. Well, until next time.
Until next time.
Thanks for listening to Breaking BizDev. Subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, or listen to the show at breakingbizdev.com. This episode was produced by Red Cedar Marketing. If you think a business podcast is right for your company, visit redcedarmarketing.com to learn more.